Welcome to the EQ Video Tip. I'm your host, Eric Forsetter. As always, thank you for joining us for another terrific episode. Before we jump in, let's review the goals of EQ Video Tip. What's on tap today? We have a great show, and it comes to us from one of our favorites, Gwen Moran, who talks to us about 5 phrases that people use that make you, or make them, I should say, discount what you're saying. And believe it or not, there are these handful of irritating and common words that we use that actually undermines your work. And what we're going to do is actually go through those words as well as what words you should use instead of them. So this way you can earn more trust with people and not undermine the work that you're doing and actually police the words that you use on a day-to-day basis. Let's jump in to some of those words. But. You should never use but as a conjunction, because when you say that, you take into account that the first part of your phrase actually doesn't mean anything. For example, I love you, but, which means it's disqualifying the first half. Or, that's a great idea, but I like something else. Don't use those phrases because but makes that first phrase into question. Instead, just give it a full stop, like, that's a great idea, period. Or, I love you, period. Don't use the but. If you have to, use and instead of but. For example, that's a great idea, and I'd like to add that we should do these other things. Remember, try to take away but from your sentences. Tip number 2. Now, this might sound silly or stupid. Right there, I shouldn't minimize myself. I shouldn't basically self-depreciate myself as well. I use this all the time, and I don't necessarily love it or hate it, but according to Gwen, it actually takes away from the stature that I might have in terms of an idea that's out there. So instead of saying, this may not be a good idea, or this may be silly or stupid, just state your idea out there and say, this is my idea, and don't qualify it as well, because you'll be more valued for your contributions in the long run. Tip number 3, respectfully. Well, if you're saying respectfully, that means you're about to disrespect someone, or you've disrespected them in the past. And it's important not to qualify something with respectfully, because people know that you're trying to be respectful when you're disagreeing and committing to someone. So instead of saying that, and instead of reacting out of anger, because typically that happens, collect your thoughts, respond appropriately, and you can argue your point without a disingenuous lead-in like respectfully or honestly. Of course you're being honest. You want to be honest all the time. When you say honestly, you're basically saying, I wasn't honest another time. So take a moment before you use respectfully or honestly, and just say what you have to say. Our next tip, I'm so busy. Look, I'm busy all the time. I'm sure you are as well. But when you say I'm so busy, you're basically saying, you're taking up my time that I don't really have, which may or may not be true, but instead you could say something better like, hey, I'm strapped for time at the moment, but I'd love to chat with you. Maybe we can talk at 2 or at 3, or here's time on my calendar that works. It's a much easier way to say I'm busy, and it makes it sound like you actually do care about that person and want to engage with them. So instead of saying I'm so busy, say right now it doesn't work for me because I have a meeting in 5 minutes, or I'm about to take a phone call, but here's a time that does. Our last tip, try. So when you say to someone, try to understand this EQ tip, you're actually talking down to them because you're saying, you can't really understand what I'm talking about. You don't understand the words that are coming out of my mouth. Instead, say something like, do you have any questions? Maybe the person doesn't understand, which is fine, but you'd rather them elaborate on what they're trying to comprehend and what parts they don't understand right now. So again, if you don't understand something, feel free to ask me a question. I'd love to analyze and understand it, and then ultimately clarify any questions that you may have. So if you have questions, please let me know. Thanks. That concludes this week's EQ video tip. We hope you loved it. Gwen is always a great author for these types of tips. Again, take a look at her tips as we put them in the next slide, and of course, make them yours. Thanks again.
So that concludes our EQ video tip for today. Try incorporating some of these tips into your daily routine. But remember, use what works best for you and personalize it for yourself. Thank you always to our great research team for providing us with some great tips today. As always on EQ Video Tip, we want to end with gratitude. So thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. Here are some resources that you can use if you want more information on EQ going forward. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you.